wife is with us today. She wasn't here last week, but she's here. And Chris Jacobs, will you please stand wherever you are, Chris Jacobs? These are the people who are responsible for the series of lectures. And it is indeed a pleasure for me to welcome you to this occasion. Without further ado, Reverend Gardner.
Catherine and my fellow felon, and all of you. I'm just delighted to be here today. Of course, when you've reached my age, you're delighted to be anywhere. Dr. Anderson, who has served his time, I don't mean just in jail, but in distinguished service, referred to my native state of Louisiana and our convicted public officials, for whom we are somewhat noted, if not notorious. But one of them, and he was governor then, the Louisiana University Law School was named for him. And when he was convicted, of course, it was Governor Lesh. They had to take down the name. And he said that when he was elected governor, he took the oath of office, but not the vow of poverty. But I come out of that kind of background. And Dean Semple, I'm very grateful for your presence. Not about medical schools, but other schools in the East. They say that a dean is someone who is too smart to be president, but not smart enough to teach. But that would not at all be true here. Now, Dr. Anderson asked me, or told me, really he didn't ask me at all, he told me to speak a few minutes and then open this and we have a conversation, but to speak about something about the black church in slavery and beyond. I think that's what you... Well, it is nigh impossible for any of us, of whatever background we might be, to look back upon the beginning of the black American community in this country and on this continent with any degree of accuracy and understanding. Perhaps some can do it more than others, but no one, I think, can really comprehend what this must have been after the awful continuing darkness of the Middle Passage. But for a people to be suddenly wrenched, that's the word I think, from their native heath, transported through the long, months-long voyage of the Middle Passage, and then to be thrown upon alien and cold shores, is beyond, I think, the power of the imagination to comprehend. What was as difficult, maybe more difficult, was the fact that they were brought from differing tribes and spoke differing languages. They had no ground of unanimity, no place of consensus, and here they were. What would they do? How would they manage? Well, I think not by happenstance, but by providence. These people heard the Christian gospel and appropriated it for themselves. They gathered in brush arbors and in whatever places of retreat they could find and entered into, however elementarily, the intricacies of the Christian faith, so that people with differing origins, differing languages, found a common ground in the church upon which they could stand. When they were released from captivity, they had absolutely no institution. Can you imagine? And I repeat it not because you do not know, but because for my own sake, every time I think about it, I almost shudder. A people suddenly supposedly emancipated, unable to read or write, having been prohibited from learning, not owning an inch of land, not knowing which way to turn, and having no organized leadership, were given a contract with history to convene, to arrange, to institute a community. And it is out of that which the Black American community came. I believe that with all of the faults, and I would not for a moment want to overly romanticize Black American life. I don't think we ought to overly romanticize any people's lives. But I think it's one of the great flights of the human spirit that these people were able to somehow will themselves into some kind of workable arrangement so that they might go forward. So much for that era. But I will recite something that I've already said to some of you this morning. I was born in Baton Rouge, as Dr. Anderson has said. New Orleans is 90 miles from Baton Rouge. I was talking with a man who recently retired in education. He was a supervisor in one of the parishes, as you know, of Louisiana. And we were in school together long years ago. He was behind me, but he told me that for 90 miles, mind you, between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, 90 miles, there was but one high school, public high school, open to people of color in 90 miles. And into that breach, into that yawning chasm, really, the church stepped. Because churches, with their people, out of whatever little they had or could get, somehow or other scraped together funds to build little schools. I started in what was called the Baton Rouge College. It was not a college, but we've had a gift for giving things vast names. But it was, I stayed there, I guess, for the first 2 years of my schooling. All of the teachers in my town, and Baton Rouge was considered a kind of advanced town. It had a high school by the time I came along. But not a single one of those teachers, as I recall, had a college degree. But they did know more than we knew. And they were graduates of this church school. It happened to be a Baptist school, the Baton Rouge College. And it gave people their training, their foundational learning, and they went on from there to other things. Now, between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, 90 miles, there was but one public school, public high school, to which people of color could go. But the churches in all of that area, in almost every parish, well, the associations were made up of 2 or 3 parishes. But in almost every one of those district associations, they began schools. Chickens and eggs and what they could gather, they brought and they pooled their meager resources and built schools. Can you imagine? As trying as has been the circumstance of the Black American community in this country, can you imagine what it would have been like had there been no rescue of getting the basic fundamentals of the society, of learning to read or write, if there had been no way by which they came into possession of those things? So if the church had done nothing else, it would have had that tremendous record, which I think has not been adequately cataloged. I need not, I will not go into any details about the civil rights movement. You all know about that. It is interesting that almost all of the civil rights leaders, except Dr. Anderson, were preachers. And he was nearly one. But when you think of Martin King, Andrew Young, Ralph Abernathy, Joseph Lowry, Wyatt Walker, all of them were preachers. So that they found their footing, directly or indirectly, in the message of the church. Walter White, who was then secretary of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, said once in my hearing, I don't know that he said it directly to me, but he said it in my hearing, that the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People would have been an impossibility in its earlier years, particularly without the church. Because schools, obviously, public schools then, were not open to such an organization. And in all of the communities of the South, it was the church. There were churches, Baptist churches, African Methodist Episcopal churches, Methodist churches, a few Presbyterian churches, who opened their doors for the National Association local chapters to meet. And without that, it would have been impossible. Also, even in my time, when a new black doctor came to the community, his point of contact, of introduction to the life of that community was through the church. It was the only thing existed. The people had confidence in the preacher, sometimes misled, but they still believed in him. And so the doctors got their introduction to the community and began their practice. At a time when I've had physicians, I had a dear friend who was a physician, H.H. Huggins, in Baton Rouge many years ago, who told me that black doctors would have had an utterly impossible task before them to find a practice and to begin a practice, had not been for the churches, where they were able to find opportunity to be seen and to be recommended. Go through all of the aspects and compartments of the life of a community, and you will find with all of the faults and failures of the black church, and it has had egregious faults, no question about that. I would be the last to deny that. But it has been the gathering point of a people's hope. Now, I'm not going to talk at any length. They tell a wonderful story in Scotland about a preacher in the Highlands. He preaches along for an hour and 15 minutes, two crofters, Highland farmers, sitting one next to the other. One says to the other, when is he going to finish? The other one says, he's finished now, he just won't quit. I will not trespass upon you, and whatever you want to talk about, we'll talk about it. But one final thing. I had the privilege years ago of preaching in the First Baptist Church of Columbia, South Carolina. Now, it was the church in which the Articles of Secession were drawn up. And as I sat in that pulpit and looked at the balcony, it was not difficult for me in imagination to see the setting, pre-emancipation, of that church. Its white members all on the main floor, black people scattered around in the balcony. The preachers of that day, and later for that matter, justified slavery and sanctified it. The preacher standing in the pulpit would say that, looking up now and again at the people in the balcony, that you're slaves. That's your ordained, God-provided place in life. That is the station that you are to have. You are slaves. That's what you are. But a strange thing happened in New Testament thought. We call it the glossolalia. It was this talking in tongues that we get corruptions of now. But somehow, when the preacher standing in the pulpit said, "You're going to forever be slaves," and in heaven there'll be a place for you, but you'll be segregated. He said that you will be slaves, but they heard, strangely enough, before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. It was a strange translation that took place somewhere between when the preacher spoke and what the people heard. And sure enough, they went out undaunted and determined that they were going to be free. And he said to them, "There'll be a place in heaven for you." And they say, they heard, "When I get to heaven, I'm going to walk all over God's heaven." It was, as Leroy Bennett has said, I think one of the great historic flights of the human spirit, that people, in the name of the church and by its power and its impetus, could have contracted the society and could have succeeded in, as far as that community has, in this America. And when we come here tonight to see you, Dr. Anderson, see all of you, what a saga, what an epic. With flaws and failures, my God, there have been many, but that a people could have made it anyhow and could have come to the station, the status which we enjoy now. To have, for instance, a father-son combination in Washington, I do not refer to the president now, but nor would I refer to him. But they said that, and Mrs. Taylor will frown at me for this, that the father, the Secretary of State, who happens to be of color, could not find the weapons Iraq had, he thought. And his son felt that Miss Jackson did not have on what she ought. I think I'll stop right there.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Reverend Taylor has agreed to answer your questions, but first let me recognize the presence of a couple other people. Mrs. Taylor is here. Mrs. Taylor, would you please stand? Let us see you. There's Mrs. Taylor. And my wife, who permits me to do the things that I do, is also here, is Norma Anderson back there. Stand up and let them see you. And my daughter, who has tolerated me more years than she wants me to tell you about. She's here, Larita. Now, Paulette Granberry is in the back, and she has been one of the strong supporters of the series, and she has the first question. Reverend Gardner is open to any question you may have relative to his presentation or any other subject.
No, I don't mind. This morning, when we had an opportunity your relationship with Dr. And we talked a little bit about the man, we talked a little bit about humor, and I thought perhaps the benefit of the rest of the folks here today, if you don't mind, sharing a little bit about your relationship with Dr.
Well, our friendship was really an inherited friendship. His grandfather, A.D. Williams, who was treasurer of the National Baptist Convention, and my father, who happened to be vice president of the convention, were friends. So that I inherited a friendship. I said this morning, and I repeat now, that Dr. King and I vacationed in cities in America, in Puerto Rico and in Jamaica, and once in Brazil. I always had the feeling that there was, I don't want to call it a remoteness, because he was a thoroughly convivial person, but there was a kind of preoccupation in him, a kind of brooding, almost a melancholy, and you could see it cross his face now and again. I don't want to make too much of that because it was the impression that I had. I'm sure others who knew him had also. But he had with that a wonderful sense of humor. I remember talking about St. Augustine, and you know that St. Augustine demonstration when the dogs were put on them. We were in a hotel room somewhere, and several of us, a number of us were sitting, 4 or 5 of us were sitting there. And he said, to Abernathy said, when those dogs were coming at us and we were praying, Rab, you were peeking. And so I asked him, I said, well, how did you know? He said, well, I was peeking a little myself. Which I think is really understandable. But there was that quality about him. I never quite analyzed it. I'm not sure it could be analyzed, but there was that preoccupation about him.
Doctor.
Thank you very much for all of your comments. Thank you for the time you spent with us today. We appreciate it, and I know I appreciate everyone. I'd like to affirm the emphasis that you place on the church and the leadership of the church in terms of being a focal point for community's hope. If you'll allow me to be so bold as to share and perhaps maybe remind you that Elevator, Fannie Lou Hamer, Marilyn Richards, and Ms. Cotton were also leaders of the civil rights movement, and neither of those women were preachers. Just in mind.
You're perfectly right, and I accept that happily. They were influenced by preachers. Yes, sir.
Here in the halls of academia, perhaps the feelings range from ambivalence to hostility, if not acceptance and being able to see the role of the church. I appreciate your reference to it. I appreciate that history work. I think obviously I was hurt as I grew up and didn't learn what I should have learned about the contributions of that organization. As you all know, the early church leadership was accepting and tacitly endorsing the institution of slavery. Kind of with that as a background, what would you have to say? I think the church's role should be today in addressing the institution, it addresses the phenomenon, I guess you could say, of homosexuality and their acceptance in the church.
Well, let me go at that in a roundabout fashion. First, you're talking about not learning about what black people had done. I didn't either. It was not in our textbooks. And to their shame, not here in the Midwest, but Eastern universities contributed to that ignorance because many of their faculty wrote textbooks, but they wrote them making them conform to the prejudices of school boards in the South. If you read, and I'm sure many of you have, W.B. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction, you come across the account of a man named William Dunning, who headed the Department of History at Columbia University. My tongue almost burns when I call his name. But he and John W. Burgess at Johns Hopkins, and one man from Ohio, James Rhodes, and there were others, began a whole movement of sympathy in the academic community to the South. And all of their textbooks were written in that fashion. The only thing I saw in the textbooks I studied as a boy in Louisiana were pictures of what we call the darkies with the banjo and laughing and enjoying themselves. It was I must call her name, it was a 6th grade teacher down there in Baton Rouge, Miss Delphine Dupy, who opened my eyes first to another history which was shielded in this country. Now, to come at what you were talking about, the matter of current issues of homosexuality, I am very sensitive to those issues because while they are not exactly similar to those proscriptions which I have suffered, there is some similarity. I have just written a letter to a man whom Dr. Anderson would know well about a succession, I won't go into all that, in which I was saying that I'm not sure that mere mortals have a right to tell God what he can and cannot do. I cringe at the idea. And I rested at that. I have it's not my matter. God is the author of the creation. Some people say, well, this is misfiring on the part of the people, but others, this is natural. It does not bother me.
I'm interested, when you went to Oberlin, how did you get to that place? What were those years like?
Well, it was a great liberation. My college first year. And you know, I suppose this is true of all of us. The steps we take are helped by other people. My college president, Dr. Bacote, whom I greatly revere in the long memory, had gone to Oberlin and got his master's degree there. And he suggested the possibility that I might go there. And I was accepted. And it was revolutionary. I found it very difficult in maybe all through, but certainly in my beginning days, because I was dealing with people who had been exposed to a breadth of intellectual background, which I had not enjoyed. And it was awkward. But I look back now upon those people in the Graduate School of Theology, all gone now, of course, but they had about them a reverent scholarship. Neither was embarrassed by the other. Scholarship was not embarrassed by the reverence, and the reverence was not compromised by the scholarship. But they gave me a solid footing in our discipline. And those of you who teach will find this so, being in all of you. There are teachers passed before me in the nighttime sometimes now. And I look back upon them with a gratitude which I cannot put into words. And I will until my last day. And those of you who teach, or who will teach, cannot know, maybe yours, but cannot know the impact that you make upon lives. And the kind of, I don't want to sound syrupy here, but the kind of immortality that you carve for yourselves in these lives that reproduce what you have tried to pass on. Tremendous. Yes, sir.
Since you are someone not born after 1950 or 1960, I'd like for you to reflect on this. Oftentimes during my life, a person would say, well, that's not what you mean, is it? And when you did a statement, I don't care what the audience might be, but predominantly white audience, that's in a meeting or what have you, that's just it. You don't mean that here, and you may have experienced that too. And I've sometimes remarked as follows, and I'd like to reflect on it. Inasmuch as a black person has had to exist in two worlds for basic survival, therefore, my presumption is that oftentimes a black person's perceptions are resharpened in a manner in which the majority population has no idea.
Yeah. Well, as you know, as the Indians say, it's hard to know what a other person is feeling unless you walk in his moccasins. And yet, it is possible for people to move out of their own background to be able to enter into, by empathy, the experience of others. And God knows that has happened over and over again. You will forgive me, I cannot resist the comment. These things come upon me. I don't know how you could tell that I was born before 1960. It reminds me of something I guess George Parker said when Calvin Coolidge died. He said, "How did they know?" Well, but you know, sometimes people of color are not able to appropriate to themselves something of their background. And it happens often. And I would guess, more and more as people get more and more removed from the experience. I was born 58 years after slavery. I knew people in my childhood who had passed through slavery. And many of them were very reluctant to even speak about it. There was a certain embarrassment about it, that they had been under the lash and all of the proscriptions of that time. But I picked up enough from them to, and in two of the books that have been done about recordings of my work, I have referred to them with great appreciation because they did a great deal to shape my sense of who I am and who I might become. You know, talking about the church, let me go back to that moment. In my town, brickyard workers of the Standard Oil, disallowed in the society, called nigger, referred to in the most contemptuous terms, caricatured in newspapers and in jokes. On Sunday morning, they put on their blue serge suits, dressed in their white dresses, and salvaged somehow out of that impossible situation a dignity. And I can see them still up and down Mount Zion Church with their heads high, having been pressed down all of them. And in some way, it perhaps cannot be recorded, but in some way, to some degree, the church gave them that dignity. They were officers, they had positions in the church, they referred to each other as sister and brother, and so somehow they made it. And that is a contribution that I think the black church made, which we cannot analyze, and perhaps we can never know fully. Yeah. Yes, to the rear first.
Thank you, sir. It's truly an honor to have you here. I have two questions. One is about faith-based education, or the faith-based issues that the Father-Son education, I won't say who they are, what your feelings are on that. The other issue is, what can the African-American church do to encourage more young people to get involved? Thank you.
You know, everything, question like that prompts some strange things in me. There's a joke going around, and I'm apolitical. That's one word. The story is told that the President and his Secretary of State were walking somewhere. They saw a man, and the President said, "Moses." The man did not answer. How did he get Moses? So he said to the Secretary of State, "Isn't that Moses?" He said, "Yes." He went over to him and said, "Moses, I called to you and you would not speak to me." He said, "Moses said, I got near a bush once." The faith-based undertakings, I think they have two immediately observable hazards. One is the hazard of accountability. And those who enter these faith enterprises, faith-based enterprises, must be exceedingly cautious about their bookkeeping and whatnot, because that's a perilous way ahead. That's one side of it. The other side of it is that government with too close supervision has not proven to be the most judicious and equal-handed agency in the world. In other words, what I'm saying really is that in this country we must be very careful that government does not get in the saddle in matters of faith and in other areas of interest. Of course, somebody has said, I hear you say, that our whole undertaking in Iraq was faith-based. Somebody, yes, sir.
What do you see the role of the contemporary church in terms of racism in this country today?
Well, the church is under continuing imperative to speak its word about racism, and it has been almost unforgivably derelict sometimes in that. But all through history, there have been churches and churchmen who have spoken forthrightly about the issues of war, the issues of race. In my town, Henry Beecher's likeness still stands in front of Borough Hall, not as close to Borough Hall as it once was. It's been moved. But Beecher in Plymouth Church, Theodore Parker up in Boston, and other people, and the abolitionists, many of whom were preachers, some of whom were preachers, were very vocal and very influential in the matter of ridding the country of the most overt and the crudest form of racism, slavery. I must say this. The black American community today is under the threat of either genocide or suicide. The AIDS epidemic, the drug culture, and the whole penal culture combined to make one shudder at what the future of the black American community is. And I am convinced that our churches have to stop sweeping AIDS, for instance, under the rug. And we're going to have to come on out with it. It's a threat to our whole national community. To other communities too, but I speak particularly of the black American community. The penal institution sold a alarming proportion of young black males in the penal system. It's frightening. I don't want to wander too much, but it is a counterpart of the old 3/5 clause Madison wrote in the 54th Federalist paper, which he propounded the doctrine that each slave would be 3/5 of a person. I spoke at President Clinton's first inauguration. I raised the question somewhat gingerly, what is 3/5 of a person? Cut off the head or cut off one arm or 3/5 of a person? But the South, this is a strange part of our history, and many of you know it. question, the South wanted the slaves counted for congressional representation purposes, but not counted for taxation. And so Madison and the others, and Jefferson concurred in this, came forward with the 3/5 vote, so that Thomas Jefferson has been called the first Negro president, because he was, after the contest with Aaron Burr, what was it, 1800, and he was elected by the Electoral College. He got 9 votes from states whose representation had been weighted and increased by the slave population, who could not vote, but who counted in his winning over Aaron Burr. It's something that historians do not talk about. A lot of things historians do not talk about. A lot of things preachers do not talk about. I read, for instance, the Declaration of Independence, I guess 100 times. And of course, human events have become necessary. One people to dissolve the political bands that bound them to another, assume among the peoples of the earth the free, separate and equal station. It was within the last year that I realized that the Supreme Court iniquitously purloined out of the Declaration that term separate and equal station, which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them. Purloined that separate and equal, substituted, what is it, a conjunction, substituted but for and, stole it from the Constitution, from the Declaration of Independence, and came out with separate but equal. Plessy Ferguson, 1896. It was one of the great iniquities of language in the history of our country, I think. Yes?
I started my police career at Morehouse College. Dr. Benjamin Mays, president of the profession. I'm assuming that, or hoping that, you had a conversation with Dr. King, with Dr. Mays' mentor, yourself, you talk about experiences like this.
Benjamin Mays? Oh, I knew him that well. I don't think anybody knew Benjamin Mays but so well. But I did know him, preached for me in Concord Church. Was one of the people who spoke favorably. I won't say he recommended me there, but spoke favorably about me when I was being considered. I think I have never known a person, any person, who had more obvious, transparent integrity than Benjamin Mays. And I've admired him all of these years for that. I heard him preach at Southern University when I was a lad on Alcibiades. And I was fascinated by this. He was tremendous. Yeah.
African Americans, you said we didn't own any land, but early in the 1800s,
Stand so they can hear you from the back.
always good to see you, Dr. In the early 80s and the early 70s, African Americans owned more land. We had more African Americans get PhD in school. At some point in time, the church had an influence with push education. Now we have more, than you talked about, we have more African Americans in the penal system, and we see that we own much less land than we do than the early 90s. How can the church get that influence back? Influence our African Americans to get out of education?
One of the things, I'm not sure about land. At what point you speak about owning land?
I would say like the early 90s.
Oh, yes, no question. Because they're land grants, the Homestead Acts. Yeah. And many of much of that land was lost as people moved out of the South, left the land, and tax and other means, by other means, land was taken from them. And I'm not so saying it was taken from them, but they lost the land. No question about that. I'm not sure that we had that many PhDs back then. I don't have the record. I don't know. But I would think that we have more people earning the ultimate degree now than ever in our history. But I don't know. This is just a notion I have. But at the heart of your question, though, I think our churches first must communicate to young black people that personhood, significance, is not to be gained at the end of a syringe needle. And I say that the counterpart of that is, or the other side of that is, that this transmission of dignity, of personhood, I think is one of our problems that I count primarily. As a child of God, and this is what our elders had, which I'm not sure we have to equal extent today. And I'm talking now purely in the realm of my happenstance thing. But I do think we have to do that. I think our churches are called upon to make an outside witness and an inside witness. Pressure must constantly be put upon public authority to see to it that our communities are protected. Drug dealers, I believe, and I've said it publicly, that every church ought to publish the confidential telephone number of every police agency, precinct, what have you, in the country to report where drug dealers are around grocery stores, in apartment buildings, and whatnot. And this can be done without danger. It can be done anonymously. But I think we're called upon to do that. Like everything else, the black community has to look two ways, as W.B. Du Bois used to say, with this double consciousness. We've got to continue to address the larger community. I read that the drug budget in America is $64 billion a year. Now that money is not going to the black fellas in Flint or Detroit riding around in BMWs, Lincoln Navigators. They're not getting the $64 billion. We don't know. Can you imagine 64? I can hardly say it. $1 billion a year. Now that's the outside. We've got to keep addressing that. But also we've got to keep addressing the inside of communicating to our people, giving them opportunities, after-school programs, learning clinics and whatnot. And let me see this. Very little attention is paid to it, but in almost every city in America, there are churches, a lot of little black churches that have after-school classes, various things by which they are trying to communicate to their younger people that they can make it. I don't want to underestimate that, but I do think that we have to make every effort, strenuous effort, to meet these times. Yes, ma'am. Well, Mrs. Taylor was a high school teacher, and she knows much more about that kind of thing than I do. I believe that learning can be made attractive. I know it was made attractive to me in a far more difficult time than we live in now. And yet I know also that young people of all colors are faced with problems and allurements and temptations and that were unheard of when I was growing up. It takes someone with more imagination than I have in the area of education, but I believe it can be done. And I believe that there are schools that are doing that. I don't know this. But this is the challenge. to make it available and to make it attractive. Well, sir.
Well, let's thank Reverend Taylor. And Representative Murphy, if you will come up. Representative Murphy has a presentation to make to our guest speaker. And let me acknowledge the president of the students, high school and college. Would you please stand so we can see who you are? There are more students here. We're very glad to have you. Representative.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. I've been privileged and honored to be a part of this series since its inception, and asked to present our guests who come to Michigan State University, to our state, to present them in recognition of their visit and to really honor their presence. It gives me great pleasure to do that today with Dr. Taylor. His work, his preaching, his ministry has greatly touched and influenced my own. And to be able to present on behalf of the Michigan State Legislature this special tribute in recognition of his visit here to Michigan State University and to the Great Lakes State, this tribute I want to present to him. I'm just excited about having this great man of God in our community, because long after he's gone, we will be thinking and meditating on the words that he gave us today, and also his spirit, which has blessed us. And so I'd like for you to just stand with me in honoring Dr. Taylor as I present him this special tribute from the Michigan State Legislature.
Oh, how nice. How nice. How utterly gracious of you, and thank you. How utterly gracious of you. I don't know whether to call you Reverend Representative or whether you are Representative Reverend.
Thanks, Doc.